Members, before the meeting proper starts, I'll just read out the emergency evacuation announcement. Should we be required to evacuate the building, would you please leave the building via the nearest available exit to the chamber? Our assembly point will be in the public car park at the side of the Civic Suite. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please note that this meeting will be audio recorded. And may I also remind members to ensure that their mobile phones are switched off or on mute. Thank you. Members, will you please be upstanding to receive the chairman's chaplain, and the managing director.
Good evening, members. Can we remain standing while we have our prayers? Thank you.
Thank you. Evening, everyone. Today is Shrove Tuesday, the day before Ash Wednesday, and it's a day in the church calendar where everyone feasts before they make those moments for the next 40 days of changing perhaps their thought or their thinking. It's the beginning of the season where we are able to reflect and ponder our life. It is a season where we can focus within the church calendar on the death and resurrection of Christ. And it's a time where those who are not part of church also spend time reflecting in what they are going to do for a season, a period of time, to reassess their values, to reassess their actions, their beliefs, to look back, and then also to look forward, to review their thinking. And this evening you gather to make decisions that will impact and change and challenge and transform the communities and the individuals that you represent. And this evening we come before Almighty God. Let us pray. We thank you for the weather, Father God, outside, for the challenges that brings in this season. We thank you for the rain. It brings change. We ask, Lord, that you will be present amongst this gathering this evening. In the decisions that are made, may there be a sense of oneness for the communities that are represented and for the impact the decisions are made here have in the people of the district. We ask these things in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
You may sit. Just want to remind people that the microphones are working, but we can't have more than 2 on at a time. So after you finish speaking, can you please turn your microphones off? Thank you. Item 1, apologies for absence. We've received apologies for Councillor Oldham and Councillor FD. Are there any others?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Cannell is slightly delayed on the train at the moment, but he does assure me that he'll be along.
Okay, thank you. Councillor.
Sorry, Chairman. Councillor Cooper, I believe he's got work commitments this evening.
All right, thank you very much. Any others? No. Item 2, to receive declarations of interest. Are there any? No. Item 3, the medium-term financial strategy 2018-19 to 2022-23. Lucas, I believe you're going to... Oh.
Thank you, Chairman. The title for the item that you read out does on the surface sound a little bit drab, but it does hide the content of what is a very important document. There is a huge amount of work that has gone into this. There's many pages and some appendices there that take quite some time to go through just to look at, and then when you look at each item and get an understanding of the work that is behind the calculations and the statements are there, you get an understanding of just what an important document this is. Clearly at the heart of it is the council tax, and if I can move straight to that one first, please, Chairman. There is a rise in council tax which equates to £6.48 a year for a Band D property, and I'll immediately be happy to move that one for the vote when that comes in due course. The other items, with the exception of the last one, which refers to appendix item 3.1, the appendix, which I'd like further discussion about, please. I'm quite happy to agree and move those en bloc. Just a few general words before I pass over to the Section 151 officer, who's done the majority of the work with her team to flesh out the detail. I think that the statements and the resolutions that we've got there in front of us underpin the efficient and prudent management of the council, which has been taking place this year and in past years, and is set for the future as well. Provides the basis of innovative investments and exciting projects for the residents of Rochford District. The general reserves are at the SIPFA guidelines, and the resolutions do meet the council objectives. That's all I wanted to say at this point, Chairman, so I'll now be happy to pass over to the Section 151 officer to flesh out the detail.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Is that not on? I think it is. Sorry, can you hear me? Okay, so yeah, this evening I'm presenting to you the medium-term financial strategy for the council, including the proposed budget for 18-19. As members will be aware, the council has a statutory duty to set a balanced budget for the new financial year, and the report sets out a number of proposals which will enable us to do so whilst continuing to deliver against our business plan priorities. Members will be more than aware that local government has faced an unprecedented period of funding pressures since 2010, and this looks set to continue for at least the medium term. Central government has placed increasing reliance on local authorities to raise revenues locally rather than to rely on grant income. Rochford will lose all of its revenue support grant funding from 18-19. This is a reduction of 1.2 million since 15-16. And it faces a potential financial cliff edge from 1920, when there's a proposed implementation of 0.6 million negative RSG. coupled with considerable financial pressures that the council's facing with regard to increased demand for services, including statutory duties around homelessness and rising inflation, this gives rise to a projected gap of around 1.8 million by 2022-23. The council has taken significant steps to start addressing the projected gap and has already identified 1 million of future proposals, including efficiencies, savings and income, to help it continue its journey towards financial self-sustainability in future years. The revised programme of work has been agreed. A revised programme of work has now been agreed in principle by the council's investment board, with one of the key deliverables being ideas that will help to meet the future financial gap. Moving back to the position for 18-19, the proposed budget has been drawn up with consultation with key stakeholders, including senior officers, members and members of the public. As referred to earlier, there are a number of key pressures that we are facing over the next financial year, including rising inflation, increased demand for services, and in addition, we will require some investment in staffing to maintain business critical areas, although careful consideration has been given to all of those proposals, with all staffing proposals being held for 6 months to identify whether they are truly required. Overall pressures in the budget for 18-19 were around 1.3 million. In order to address those, we've identified £850,000 of efficiency savings and new income items from across the portfolio areas. In addition, there's around £250,000 of growth in the council tax base and business rates. This leaves a remaining £200,000 gap still to find, which, as Councillor Smith referred to, is proposed to be met through an increase of 2.98% in the council tax. This equates to around 12 pence per week for an average Band E property. Moving on to the capital programme for 18-19, this is mainly around enhancement of the council's existing assets. However, there's an intention through the council's investment board that a programme of longer-term investment projects will be identified, and these will be built into the capital programme at a future date once they've been agreed by a council. The proposed 18-19 capital and treasury management strategy sets out the parameters and indicators under which that work would be undertaken. As Councillor Smith said, we plan to maintain a general balance of around 10% of the net revenue budget. This is considered prudent in order to maintain a contingency in the event of unexpected or emergency costs that could arise during the course of the year. The Council also proposes to maintain its strategy of transferring its new homes bonus monies into the infrastructure reserve for investment projects. While this does mean that Council's projected level of reserves is set to increase slightly over the medium term, pending agreement of investment projects through the investment board, the Council's levels of overall earmarked reserves remain at the lower end of comparable local authorities and are therefore not considered to be excessive, particularly given the climate of financial uncertainty that the Council is now facing. So in summary, I would say that the medium-term financial strategy has been prepared against a backdrop of significant funding reductions and financial challenges. These factors could jeopardise the Council's sustainable financial position unless continued budget savings, efficiencies and income streams are delivered over the medium term. In relation to the papers that you've got in front of you, I'd like to draw your attention to just a couple of specific points that have arisen since the papers were published. Firstly, the local government finance settlement, the final settlement, has now been published by government, and that confirmed the level of funding that's set out in the papers has not changed since the provisional settlement. I would also like to make a correction to a line in Appendix 2 within the detailed budgets for homelessness under Councillor Webb's portfolio, where an income line called removals and storage income should in fact read rental income from 22 South Street. There's a further small correction in relation to Appendix 3 of the fees and charges for environmental services, where a couple of lines are showing an increase where in fact all fees will be held flat in next financial year and therefore should show a 0% increase. Finally, the Council's Review Committee met on the 6th of February to consider the Capital and Treasury Management Strategy, which is appended to this report. The minutes of that meeting form part of the council papers that you've got tonight. The review committee did recommend that the strategy should be recommended to full council, subject to an adjustment to the wording of section 9 of the strategy and the removal of the option for inter-authority lending from the council's proposed lending list. So I would just advise members that they should bear in mind the review committee's recommendation when agreeing the recommendation within the MTFS report. So unless there's any specific questions that members would like to ask, I would refer back to the chair to agree the recommendations in the report.
Yeah, we've got a proposal on the floor. Do we have a seconder for that? For the council ward? And that's for the first 6 recommendations, then separately the increase in the council tax, and then the next 6, but not the last one. Is that correct? Yes? So bullet point number 6 has to be approved by a recorded vote. So we'll take that one now. Bullet point number 6, the increase in Rochford District Council tax, 2.98% for 2018-19 be approved by recorded vote. Right, okay. Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Mason, you may speak.
I believe Councillor Cutmore indicated before me. He did. That's what I said.
Okay. Sorry, my post-it notes are getting confused. Yes, Councillor Cutmore, then Councillor Mason, then Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Chairman. I always follow your directions. Chairman, a brilliant budget. I think we have a clear, prudent section of government within our own authority that actually looks after our residents and looks after our pennies as well as our pounds. But we have challenges, Chairman. From this year, in other words, next civic year, we'll have no revenue support grant whatsoever. And indeed, within a short time after that, it's mooted that we shall have negative revenue support grant. So we have significant challenges coming forward. One thing we do, Chairman, as a council, is the new homes bonus that we receive, which has also been reduced because it's down to 4 years' worth instead of 5 years' worth, so it's been top sliced. We put aside to make sure that we A, cover ourselves, and B, we use that for investments. Again, a prudent measure that we take forward. I believe, Chairman, from the surveys that have been done in the past and present, that we have highly regarded services, and I'm constantly hearing about that from our residents. Yes, we're not perfect, we never will be, but we get very good services delivered by our officers, and I'm very mindful of the fact that they're delivering that with a lower workforce, again, which is a prudent measure going forward. Chairman, we have no borrowing whatsoever, none. So we're not paying interest, we're not paying back capital. Of course, we may use that in the future, but it's something that I think has stood us in good stead in the past. But we need to make sure that if we do borrow, we borrow prudently and for the right thing and for investment that will bring forward dividends for both the council and, of course, our residents. But through that prudent use of our resources, when we've had to, for instance, for homelessness, when we had to provide some extra funds this year to make sure that we accommodated the vast increase in homelessness that I think all councils have actually experienced, we had that money aside to be able to carry that forward. But one other thing we're doing, which I think is already mentioned, is we're investing in our own assets and making sure we exploit them accordingly. So I think carrying ourselves forward, these are the right policies that will bear fruit into the future. It's not an instant thing. You can't get money straight away from it, from that sort of investment. But it does mean that we will get extra income that we can use towards the resources that we need to deliver good services. One thing that we've done is, of course, is to establish a LATCO, a Local Authority Trading Company. And the Green Gateway has been a successful year. It's turned a profit. And I think it's also establishing itself as one of the main businesses delivering those services in the authority. It's certainly working along with other parishes and even being looked at by other councils as both an example and actually as maybe using our services too. One thing I think, and it was touched on by our 151 officer, is about the fees. All our fees, Chairman, are saying the same. We've not increased any of them, and that includes parking. So we've managed to hold that steady as well. So that covers us for those fees that are paid by our residents. Indeed, we've actually employed more staff in areas that we know are under pressure. We've actually put aside, I think it's 163,000 odd, to make sure that we're actually covering those areas where we think there are pressures within the council. And I don't think there's too many councils that do that either. We've actually found the money to be able to do that because we are prudent, Chairman. So I think that prudent budget that we have will carry us into the future. Yes, of course, we're going to have our challenges. And yes, we're looking at a modest rise in our council tax precept. 12 pence a week for a Band D property, Chairman. Less if you've got a lower banding than that, which I think most people would be able to afford, indeed probably not even notice. But having said that, Chairman, there will be other increases as well. We send the bills out, but of course we're not responsible for all of it. So, Chairman, going forward, I think we've proved that we have a track record of running a very prudent council, and I'm very proud of our record on that, and I think they stand by our record. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. The first thing I'd like to do is thank Naomi Lucas for answering a fairly long list of questions put by myself and my members, so thank you very much. I want to talk this evening about some principles we seem to have missed out on. But before that, I'd just like to remind this council that the challenges of no RSG and negative RSG have been actually imposed by a Conservative government. I can't avoid saying that, Chairman, because that's where it is. So the challenges we face have been imposed upon us. Chairman, I'm only here because residents elect me. And that goes the same for everyone else that's here. So everything I think about is residents. The council shouldn't make it difficult for residents to understand budget proposals and form a view themselves. It's not just for us sitting here as elected people to make those decisions on their behalf, but I take the view that I want to consult with them and I want them to give me a view of how they would like me to actually conduct myself and vote. So I've been very disappointed that residents who might have wanted to read this MTFS document this year had to go and consult with a previous year's report to get detail on how the council, the detail, Chairman, of how the council might close a gap of something around 1.8 million. In fact, I had a message from a resident at 6 o'clock this morning. So I don't speak of something that's a pie in the sky. This is something that really happens. Do I really have to go and read prior year reports to find out the detail of how that 1.8 million may be closed? And that includes the sort of thing that does involve, I'm afraid, things like car parking charges and maybe other new charges, which I've been very surprised haven't been elucidated in this current report. Chairman, raising council tax to the maximum required before a referendum is needed is not a modest increase. I've just heard this is a modest increase. It's the maximum, okay, 2.98 versus 3, the maximum that this council could have increased council tax by without having a referendum. Residents who have contacted me say that it's not modest. Many of them speak about not receiving that sort of pay rise themselves. So I'm afraid they do see this as an imposition, and they really aren't very keen on it at all. And I don't think they're going to be very accepting. The other thing they're not going to be accepting about is we're putting 50% of that, nearly 100,000, straight into reserves. But as they put it to me, there's no specific project, no specific benefit for residents that's been identified, nor any specific service that's actually going to be improved. And again, they tell me this is not going to find favour with them. Chairman, we know about the investment board. It's been in place for some time, but the figures and all the major projects are all in exempt. And because of that, residents don't know really much about what our policy and strategy is. And they deserve some detail, apart from being told, surely we are going to exploit, what a strange word, exploit our assets, and we're going to generate some welcome income. I think they deserve a bit more than that after the length of time that this investment board's been running. And I can't tell them tonight or at any time how much that investment board is currently spent and what the yield is currently on that. Chairman, I can't support this budget because I believe that we've not informed residents sufficiently to carry them with us. And we need to carry residents with us because, frankly, that's who we serve. We shouldn't forget we're not here in some sort of financial bubble. We are in here to represent them in relation to the most local economy you can imagine. Chairman, I want to also talk about the last item in the recommendation. I don't believe the Chairman of Review will get the opportunity to speak this evening, as he would do if he was presenting any minutes, but there are reports here. So I do, Chairman, want to put to you, so you know, I want a recorded vote on the last item on the recommendation which relates to the Treasury Management Report and the recommendations of Review Committee. Chairman, just a few points so I can remind members, and particularly those who weren't at Review Committee, just what the points that were being made. The Council has never lent to local authorities before, and I actually can't think why it now becomes something that we're very interested in doing. The officers only became aware of premium rates, interest rates being available from local authorities in December. Now, they've been at great pains to point out to Review Committee that they've always had this ability, this power, this delegation to lend to a local authority. So what I don't quite understand is, if it was such a great deal and they were really very happy about it, why didn't they lend some money to a local authority in December? Why did they wait to talk to Review Committee? Why did they wait for Review Committee to make a decision on the Treasury Management strategy that they wanted to put forward to full Council? But since then, Chairman, there has been critical focus on local authority finance, both by the DCLG and the financial press. We know about Northampton, and the financial press and the LGIU is talking about other councils having similar issues. So what are we likely to earn out of this additional risk? Because you can't do a credit analysis of a local authority. You can look at the last two balance sheets. But I'm going to put it to you, look, most of our investment strategy is in exempt. So how will you know what's going on in other councils? We won't. And I don't know what that risk is, and nor do you, and nor will our officers. So how much would we earn by taking additional risk? We'll earn another £6,000 per annum for a whole year, or £16 per night. I can't see any reason, Chairman, at this point, while this situation of difficult financial circumstances for local authorities, why we should want to take that risk. If it's not financial, and I did read that it's not financial, then I can't think of the reason that we might wish to take that risk. Perhaps someone would like to tell me what they think that other reason other than financial return might be. I'm not going to be voting against the recommendations of the Review Committee, Chairman. As I say, I'm looking forward to having a recorded vote on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think Councillor John Mason's probably stolen some of my thunder because there's a couple of things that I might mention which he has covered. What I will say is that it's been widely reported that 95% of local authorities in England and Wales are going to be raising council tax this year. So on the basis of that, it's not a surprise that this budget has been put forward and the recommendation in it. And bearing in mind the gap for which we are looking to try to narrow. But I want to reiterate what Councillor Mason stated, and that is now a fact, and a fact that our local residents are now starting to realise and see that there's a direct relationship between reduction in funding from central government and increases in their council tax, because it is the reduction in money coming from central government that is forcing councils across the country to increase the council tax on them. And I think that when people say that we are only asking for a small increase, most people's incomes are limited by the lack of increase in wage increases, and particularly affects low income people who may be on fixed incomes. So it is in that area that we need to think about what we are intending to do and how it affects our more vulnerable residents. And that's all I've got to say on this matter at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Mason and Councillor Hookway have already mentioned, I understand that the Council is under pressure to deliver the services that our residents have come to expect. With the funding removed by central government and this Council taking the opportunity to shift costs to town and parish councils, such as in the case of the toilets and the playgrounds, it still remains a challenge to close that budget deficit. I, however, do not think I can support this budget tonight when I hear the solution is a rise in the council tax, which I believe is excessive. The council tax rise gives a surplus revenue which will be put into reserves. These reserves have been used to offset some poor management in projects such as the ICT, where double the original budget has been spent. The council needs to work harder to make sure that these type of projects are delivered on time and within budget in the future. I do not think our residents should be made to pay for the council's mistakes and poor project management at a time when their own household budgets are being stretched without increase in their own incomes. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I suppose it won't surprise you to know that I agree with everything Councillor Mason has said. and also the other leaders of the opposition. However, I'm going to focus on the recommendation that's come forward from the review committee, because that is a matter, I think, of concern, and I'm aware that not everyone was available to listen to the very lengthy and involved debate that took place. It is of concern that the information on rates, interest rates, given to the review committee and quoted at 1.9 of the report, item 3.1, were ascertained to be incorrect after the meeting. According to further information from the Section 151 officer, this rate was altered on the 2nd of November, but not acted upon until after the review meeting last week. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on that. We were advised that there were three main criteria applied to investments, and I'm sure we all apply them ourselves in our day-to-day life with our own personal finance. But for the sake of clarity, they are security, liquidity, and the interest rate, which is the return on risk. There is no objective measurement of security when lending to another local authority. There is absolutely none. The only information we can get is historic or is hidden. With regards to liquidity, we've all seen in the press that this is very uncertain, and there's speculation abounds that it will be illiquid. And the return of risk was not as stated. We were told that it was a differential between 0.2 and 0.6%. The actual differential was between 0.4 and 0.6%, assuming the next 0.6% is correct. I haven't checked that one. That's 100% error. This extra risk would offer a relatively small increased rate of return. But as it has taken Rochford District Council over 3 months to notice and react to a rate change, such an investment strategy could be very risky. For this reason, I support the amended recommendation, the recommendation from the review committee, and not the original recommendation. And I hope that this council sees the need to be prudent at this time. Thank you.
Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chair. The question of the projects that the Investment Board are looking at being all in exempt is incorrect. There are at least 3 projects that spring to my mind that are in the public domain, and in a couple of cases they certainly have been through consultation, and they've been on public display. The third has actually been through the planning committee. So those 3 projects are well established in the public domain. They're 57 South Street, 19 South Street, and a smaller project over in Stanbridge. So I'd just like to correct and remind members that not all the projects are in exempt. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It will probably be as no surprise that I also cannot support the increase in council tax. There's a few things I just want to go through to start with. You was talking about trust, this administration. As has already been said, we're trusting them with 3.2 million in a hard soft infrastructure fund which has no detail. It's interesting that Councillor Steptoe said that some of these projects are not in exempt. Can he please confirm, could he now say in public what the costs and estimates for those projects are? Can he give returns on capital on those projects? I don't think he can, because I believe those are in exempt and we cannot talk about them. If I'm wrong, I'm happy to apologise to him personally on that. With regard to trust, we're talking about an increase in council tax which raises £200,000 for this council, 202,000 plus a few other pounds, I believe. I know it has already been said by Naomi Lucas that that bridges the gap. However, this is one of the other problems with this budget. In the executive summary, we have at 6.5, the total budget gap before savings efficiency is 8.45 million. In 6.6, savings and efficiencies are 8.5 million. That seems to me to close the budget gap. I understand the figures that were given to us in the meeting and that it is presented slightly differently to that. But when the executive summary actually says we've closed the budget gap with efficiencies and savings, that means the £200,000 is going directly into reserves. Again, back to trust. Councillor Newport mentioned about the transfer out of reserves for ICT projects. We are asked to trust you, but then last year there were £264,000, which is in the accounts transferred from a reserve into a capital budget because we trusted the administration. I will leave that there. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can talk about the Treasury management strategy, please. There's the recommendation on 3.1.3. I've got no problem with the changing and adjustment to the paragraphs that are mentioned, but I'm not in favour of the removal of the option of inter-authority lending, and I'll move that is left in the strategy. We have a strategy that has, on the whole, been accepted with that small alteration and the proposed removal of lending to other authorities. The strategy itself outlines a wide range of ways in which this council will invest money. The way in which the council has the money to invest is a nature of how it works. It's not that we sit on large reserves that aren't earmarked for specific projects. It's that we handle a lot of money for a lot of other authorities, in particular Essex. And that money won't always come in even streams. And from time to time, over weekends, over bank holidays, even overnight, we will have amounts of money belonging that are going to be paid to other authorities, but it's sitting in our account. And it's only prudent and wise that we invest it sensibly so that we can maximise our assets. We have our priorities in the policy of security and liquidity, and they underpin everything we do. We're not seeking for the permission to simply change all of our investment policy to loaning to other councils overnight. This is just one of a wide range of investments that we would like to have in as an option to be used or not used as the case may be. And that case may be based on professional advice. It will be based on research. It will be based on investigation. Clearly, councils are not financial institutions, and they need to be looked at in a different way. But there are plenty of financial institutions that have their problems, and we choose not to invest with them. We know that councils work under SIT for guidance. We know that they have strict audits. We know that they have plenty of public documents available for examination. No investment would be undertaken without meeting the test of security and liquidity. I think it's fair to trust the officer's professional opinion, to sit down, to examine what their options are, and if on whatever occasion it happens to be, an investment in another council for a period that within the strategy is appropriate, then they should have the flexibility to do that, to maximise the assets that we have available to us. We've heard a number of members here tonight say that how they understand how challenging the situation is. I'm chairing a meeting this coming Monday on on handing out some grants to some of our local charities and residents. Making money from investments helps provide the resource to do these things. So I'm happy to move that the investment policy should include the option, the ability to invest in other councils as appropriate. A little bit about paragraphs, I'm not too fussed. And I'd be happy to support a call for a recorded vote on that one. Thank you.
I'd like to second that.
Right, so we've got agreement on that one.
First of all, you're saying that are members happy to take all the items, bullet point 6, all the item bullet point 6 and the final item en bloc? That's the first question.
John Mason wants to come back. Councillor Mason.
Chairman, I'm even more alarmed than I was at the review committee. Let me explain. I heard that we receive, and I know that, we receive monies through the council tax demands on behalf of other precepting organisations, including the largest one, Essex County Council, and increasingly the police. So we are proposing to use their money and place that with other local authorities. Chairman, I'm not sure how prudent that is. I don't know whether they will consider that to be very prudent. I think we ought to ask their permission to use their money to earn interest which ends up in our coffers. I think there's something a little wrong. If I remember rightly, when I was a parish councillor, and that was a long, long time ago on 2 parish councils, that parish councils have the opportunity to take the whole of their precept in one amount immediately after receipt of the precept. Presumably, the other authorities can also take lump sums from the precept rather than leave it all with Rochford District Council. That's what I understand. But my particular concern is having money from other authorities on whose behalf we have raised money and placing that into what I consider to be potentially a risky sector. Chairman, I must reiterate, you can look at 2 last year's balance sheets, but you don't know anything else. You don't know anything about the business cases behind their investment portfolios if they're in exempt, like our council. I don't want our officers to be placed in that invidious position. An invidious position which, having had some experience in lending, in institutional markets, I wouldn't wish to take at this point in time. So for those of us that choose to vote and not abstain, I would say think very carefully about what we're voting to do and what we're voting to do with other people's money. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to come back. When I spoke earlier, I didn't mention about the last item in relation to what come up before review and what review committee had quite an extensive discussion about this. This was a meeting that did go through this in quite some considerable detail, and there was quite a range of opinions that were put forward. I would think it. Members should consider that the review committee has had the opportunity to read through this and take some careful considerations and quiz our financial officers about what they have been proposing. it is interesting that this is something that has been a option that has not been used in the past. And it is interesting that it's being considered at the moment when local authorities, as we well know for ourselves, are under considerable financial strain. And that may lead to some poor decision making taking place in other local authorities. Because there is no credit rating system available to make an assessment of the viability of an investment with another local authority and how safe it is and what the risk is with regard to that, it was considered by a number of members of the review committee that that may be a risk that is too much to take at this time. We are looking to invest in something that is going to be riskier. The returns are going to be potentially higher because the interest rate on that return is shown to be higher, but that is just an example of showing that it is a riskier option. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Right, thank you, members. We have a proposal that didn't see Councillor Ward.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Isn't that interesting? I'm in the wrong place. I'm in the wrong place. Freudian slip. Great expectations, I think. Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I found it was very, very interesting, the debate that has carried on this evening, and I found that the arguments being put forward, some of which are rather strange, I have to say, and especially the arguments regarding council tax receipts being used to invest in other authorities. And I think that's a huge red herring, massive, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we have an extremely prudent council that have operated in a way over the years which has proved that we are one of the only councils in the United Kingdom that is totally debt-free. So the illusions that are being created by gentlemen on the rear benches are crazy.
Not in the house,
I am, but it feels like it. Yeah, I know, thank you very much. I think that this item that has been highlighted by members with regard to what is going on just shows exactly what a good budget we have put forward. And the reason is the members of the opposition have found this is the only thing that they can bring to this chamber as an item of criticism. Because quite frankly, I think that is false as well. We need to have the options available to be able to invest in any way we need to. And of course we have been prudent. We have never invested in authorities before. And there's nothing to say we may not do it in the future, but that is a decision that is down to our 151 officer in regards to sensible investments. So I totally refute the illusion that I'm afraid the members of the opposition have put forward, and I support Councillor Smith in his motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'll get back to where I was. We have a proposal for the recommendations. Apart from the 6th bullet point and the last bullet point where we've had the debate, can we take those, are we in agreement to take those on block, apart from the 6th bullet point and the last bullet point?
I call for a recorded vote on that one, Chairman.
Can you stand, please?
asking if members wish to take them en bloc.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Apart from that, and that just to reiterate that.
Yeah. But I am asking if we can take these en bloc, apart from the sixth bullet point, which has to be a recorded vote separately, and the last one. Yes.
Okay, so Michelle.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Michelle needs to take the recorded vote.
So we need a recorded vote, please. So the first 5 bullet points.
Just the first 5?
The first 5 to start with.
Chairman, it's a motion.
Sorry,
it's about, no, it's about.
That's okay. You have to recorded vote on the first 5, or the first 5 and the next, not the 6, and then the next 6.
It's all of them, Chairman.
Oh, all of them.
Chairman, it's apart from 6 and the final one.
Right. All of them apart from the 6th one and the final one.
Recorded vote to take this.
Yes.
The recorded vote is the principle of taking them en bloc.
Yeah.
It's,
Are we not voting for them?
well, Chairman, if you now say so, you could say that this is a vote.
Oh. We vote on them?
Go on, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to vote on these, and it will be a recorded vote. For clarification, yeah. Councillor Hookway, what did you want to say?
Sorry, my microphone won't go on, so I'll speak loud. Would it be possible for either the chairman or chairman's assistants to read out the recommendations?
Oh. Can you do that?
Yeah.
And can you clarify?
It's just that the
Yeah, clarify.
votes.
Right, okay.
Chairman, thank you. Could I first be clear that the request on your behalf, that the request for a recorded vote relates to agreement to all the bullet points apart from the 6th one, which has to be taken separately, and the final one. Okay. In that case, Chairman, just to clarify, if members would like to turn to page 3.24 of the paper with the recommendations, it would be about the first 5 bullet points. Net revenue budget requirement be set at 9.896 million. Capital programme proposed methods for capital expenditure to be approved. The Section 151 officer being authorised to adjust capital project budgets in 2018-19 throughout the programme after 2017-18 accounts are closed and amounts of slippage and budget carry forward required are known. Noting that the proposed council tax requirement for the council's own purpose, excluding precepts from parish and towns, is 7 million. And the draft equivalent Band T tax base being based on 31,297 properties. The schedule of fees and charges for 2018-19 be as per Appendix 3. The general balance being set at £0.884 million as at 1st of April 2018. Earmark reserves being as per the table in Section 14 of the Section 151 Officers' Report. The statement on the robustness of the estimates and reserves at Section 14 of the 151 Officers' Report being noted. The summary of the Equality Impact Assessment as set out in Section 12 of this report being noted. And finally, it being noted that the final local government finance settlement isn't expected until early February, and any change resulting from that will be issued and tabled at the budget meeting. There is nothing to introduce in that regard. Members, the recorded vote is in relation to those recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, before we carry on, Councillor Mason, I have noticed that you wanted to speak, but we are now taking a vote on this. Fair enough, yes.
Chairman, I can't see how we can take a recorded vote on items that are supposed to be noted. I think we're ourselves. And while I'm actually on my feet, I would like to ask that those items are taken individually, because some are facts, and it's very difficult to vote one way or another on a fact. If you force me to take them en bloc, I'm most likely to abstain, because I have no choice, because I'm not going to vote for something that's to be noted, and I'm certainly not voting on facts.
Carry on.
Still got the motion on the table.
Right, so, Councillor Cutmore.
Word of clarification, Chairman. Just to remind members that the Section 151 officer mentioned Appendix 2 about the 22 South Street, and about Appendix 3, the environmental services charges. So I think we need to note that, because those appendices were changed.
Right, thank you.
So you asked Michelle to take the recording.
Can we take the recorded vote now, please?
Councillor Burton. Councillor Mrs Butcher.
For.
Councillor Cannell. Councillor Carter. Councillor Cutmore. Councillor Dray. Councillor Eaves. Councillor Mrs Gooding. Councillor Griffin. Councillor Hazelwood. Councillor Hookway. Councillor Mrs Hoy. Councillor Hoy.
Abstain.
Councillor Mrs Hughes. Councillor Ioannou. Councillor Lucas Gill. Councillor Mrs Lumley. Councillor Christine Mason. Councillor Elliot Mason. Councillor John Mason.
Abstain.
Councillor Merrick.
For.
Councillor Milne.
For.
Councillor Mountain.
Against.
Councillor Newport. Councillor Mrs Rowe. Councillor Mrs Shaw. Councillor Smith. Councillor Sperring. Councillor Stanley. Councillor Steptoe. Councillor Ward. Councillor Webb. Councillor Mrs Weston. Councillor Williams. Councillor Wilson.
So they are agreed, Chairman. Do you want me to take the next bit to you?
Yeah.
You want me to just
Yeah,
go?
yeah.
Okay, just invite me to. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Chairman. That was agreed. 22 for, 4 against, 9 abstention. Now, Chairman, Council needs to turn to recommendation bullet point 6 that needs to be agreed through recorded vote. If I could invite Michelle to. Thank you.
Councillor Burton. Councillor Mrs Butcher.
For.
Councillor Cannell. Councillor Carter. Councillor Cutmore. Councillor Dray. Councillor Eaves. Councillor Mrs Gooding. Councillor Griffin. Councillor Hazelwood. Councillor Hookway. Councillor Diane Hoy. Councillor Michael Hoy.
Against.
Councillor Mrs Hughes. Councillor Ioannou. Councillor Lucas Gill. Councillor Mrs Lumley. Councillor Christine Mason. Councillor Elliot Mason. Councillor John Mason. Councillor Merrick. Councillor Milne. Councillor Mountain. Councillor Newport. Councillor Mrs Rowe. Councillor Mrs Shaw. Councillor Smith. Councillor Sperring. Councillor Stanley. Councillor Steptoe. Councillor Ward. Councillor Webb. Councillor Mrs Weston. Councillor Williams. Councillor Wilson.
Against.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. That was carried 22 for, 13 against. Now, Chairman, we turn to the final bullet point in the recommendations. There is a motion on the table that the recommendation of the review committee be agreed apart from a change to the inter-authority lending aspect. So the motion is now that inter-authority lending is included as an option in the proposed lending list for 2018-19. So that's the motion, Chairman. There will, as a technicality, need to be at least 7 members standing for that to be taken by recorded vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll now invite Michelle to take the recorded vote. Thank you.
Councillor Burton. Councillor Mrs Butcher.
For.
Councillor Cannell. Councillor Carter. Councillor Cutmore. Councillor Dray. Councillor Eaves. Councillor Mrs Gooding. Councillor Griffin. Councillor Hazelwood. Councillor Hookway. Councillor Diane Hoy. Councillor Michael Hoy.
Against.
Councillor Mrs Hughes. Councillor Ioannou. Councillor Lucas Gill. Councillor Mrs Lumley. Councillor Christine Mason. Councillor Elliot Mason. Councillor John Mason. Councillor Merrick. Councillor Milne. Councillor Mountain.
Against.
Councillor Newport. Councillor Mrs Rowe. Councillor Mrs Shaw. Councillor Smith. Councillor Sperring. Councillor Stanley. Councillor Steptoe. Councillor Ward. Councillor Webb. Councillor Mrs Weston. Councillor Williams. Councillor Wilson.
Against.
Thank you, Chairman. So that was carried 21 for, 14 against, and that concludes that agenda item, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to item 4 on the agenda, and that's the exclusion of press and public. Is that agreed, members? I think we've got to wait for...